Chapter 3 of The String of Pearls. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Eugene Smith. The String of Pearls, Chapter 3, The Dog and the Hat. The earliest dawn of morning was glistening upon the masts, the cordage, and the sails of a fleet of vessels lying below Sheerness. The crews were rousing themselves from their night's repose, and to make their appearance on the decks of the vessels from which the night watch had just been relieved. A man of war, which had been the convoy of the fleet of merchantmen through the Channel, fired a gun as the first glimpse of the morning sun fell upon her tapering masts. Then, from a battery in the neighborhood, came another booming report, and that was answered by another farther off, and then another, until the whole chain of batteries that girded the coast, for it was a time of war, had proclaimed the dawn of another day. The effect was very fine, in the stillness of the early morn, of these successions of reports. And as they died away in the distance like mimic thunder, some order was given on board the man-of-war, and in a moment the masts and cordage seemed perfectly alive with human beings clinging to them in various directions. Then, as if by magic, or as if the ship had been a living thing itself and had possessed wings, which at the mere instigation of a wish could be spread far and wide, there fluttered out such sheets of canvas as was wonderful to see, and as they caught the morning light, and the ship moved from the slight breeze that sprang up from the shore, she looked indeed as if she walked the waters like a thing of life. The various crews of the merchantmen stood upon the decks of their respective vessels, gazing after the ship of war, as she proceeded upon another mission similar to the one she had just performed in protecting the commerce of the country. As she passed one vessel, which had been, in point of fact, actually rescued from the enemy, the crew, who had been saved from a foreign prison, cheered lustily. There wanted but such an impulse as this, and then every merchant vessel that the man-of-war passed took up the gladsome shout, and the crew of the huge vessel were not slow in their answer, for 3 deafening cheers, such as had frequently struck terror into the hearts of England's enemies, awakened many an echo from the shore. It was a proud and a delightful sight, such a sight as none but an Englishman can thoroughly enjoy, to see that vessel so proudly stemming the waste of waters. We say none but an Englishman can enjoy it, because no other nation has ever attempted to achieve a great maritime existence without being most signally defeated, and leaving us still, as we ever shall be, masters of the seas. These proceedings were amply sufficient to arouse the crews of all the vessels, and over the taffrail of one in particular, a large-sized merchantman, which had been trading in the Indian seas, 2 men were leaning. One of them was the captain of the vessel, and the other a passenger, who intended leaving that morning. They were engaged in earnest conversation, and the captain, as he shaded his eyes with his hand and looked along the surface of the river, said, in reply to some observation from his companion, "I'll order my boat the moment Lieutenant Thornhill comes on board. I call him lieutenant, although I have no right to do so, because he has held that rank in the King's service, but when quite a young man was cashiered for fighting a duel with his superior officer." "The service has lost a good officer," said the other. "It has indeed. A braver man never stepped, nor a better officer. But you see they have certain rules in the service, and everything is sacrificed to maintain them. I can't think what keeps him. He went last night, and said he would pull up to the temple stairs because he wanted to call upon somebody by the waterside, and after that he was going to the city to transact some business of his own, and that would have brought him nearer there, you see. And there are plenty of things coming down the river." "He's coming!" cried the other. "Don't be impatient. You will see him in a few minutes." "What makes you think that?" "Because I see his dog. There, don't you see? Swimming in the water, and coming direct towards the ship." "I cannot imagine. I can see the dog, certainly, but I can't see Thornhill, nor is there any boat at hand. I know not what to make of it. Do you know, my mind misgives me that something has happened amiss. The dog seems exhausted. Lend a hand there to Mr. Thornhill's dog, some of you. Why, it's a hat he has in his mouth." The dog made towards the vessel, but without the assistance of the seamen, with the whole of whom he was an immense favourite, he certainly could not have boarded the vessel, and when he reached the deck, he sank down upon it in a state of complete exhaustion, with the hat still in his grasp. As the animal lay, panting, upon the deck, the sailors looked at each other in amazement, and there was but one opinion among them all now, and that was that something very serious had unquestionably happened to Mr. Thornhill. "I dread," said the captain, "an explanation of this occurrence." "Well, what on earth can it mean? That's Thornhill's hat, and here is Hector. Give the dog some drink and meat directly. He seems thoroughly exhausted." The dog ate sparingly of some food that was put before him, and then, seizing the hat again in his mouth, he stood by the side of the ship and howled piteously. Then he put down the hat for a moment, and walking up to the captain, he pulled him by the skirt of the coat. "You understand him," said the captain to the passenger. "Something has happened to Thornhill, I'll be bound. And you see the object of the dog is to get me to follow him to see what it's about." "Think you so? It is a warning, if it be such at all, that I should not be inclined to neglect. And if you will follow the dog, I will accompany you. There may be more in it than we think of, and we ought not to allow Mr. Thornhill to be in want of any assistance that we can render him, when we consider what great assistance he has been to us. Look how anxious the poor beast is." The captain ordered a boat to be launched at once, and manned by 4 stout rowers. He then sprang into it, followed by the passenger, who was a Colonel Jeffrey, of the Indian Army, and the dog immediately followed them, testifying by his manner great pleasure at the expedition they were undertaking, and carrying the hat with him, which he evidently showed an immense disinclination to part with. The captain ordered the boat to proceed up the river towards the Temple Stairs, where Hector's master had expressed his intention of proceeding, and when the faithful animal saw the direction in which they were going, he lay down in the bottom of the boat perfectly satisfied, and gave himself up to that repose of which he was evidently so much in need. It cannot be said that Colonel Jeffrey suspected that anything of a very serious nature had happened. Indeed, their principal anticipation, when they came to talk it over, consisted in the probability that Thornhill had, with an impetuosity of character they knew very well he possessed, interfered to redress what he considered some street grievance, and had got himself into the custody of the civil power in consequence. "Of course," said the captain, "Master Hector would view that as a very serious affair, and finding himself denied access to his master, see he has come off to us, which was certainly the most prudent thing he could do, and I should not be at all surprised if he takes us to the door of some watch-house, where we shall find our friends snug enough." The tide was running up, and that Thornhill had not saved the turn of it by dropping down earlier to the vessel was one of the things that surprised the captain. However, they got up quickly, and as at that hour there was not much on the river to impede their progress, and as at that time the Thames was not a thoroughfare for little stinking steamboats, they soon reached the ancient Temple Stairs. The dog, who had until then seemed to be asleep, suddenly sprung up, and seizing the hat again in his mouth, rushed again on shore, and was closely followed by the captain and colonel. He led them through the temple with great rapidity, pursuing with admirable tact the precise path his master had taken towards the entrance to the temple in Fleet Street, opposite Chancery Lane. Darting across the road then, he stopped with a low growl at the shop of Sweeney Todd, a proceeding which very much surprised those who followed him, and cause them to pause to hold a